You're listening to Booth Talk from the After Movie Diner, and on this episode we're exceptionally happy to be speaking to the Nelms Brothers, Ian and Eshom, who are the brains, writers and directors behind Waffle Street, Small Town Crime starring Jon Cross and Robert Forster, and their latest film, Fatman, which came out at the end of November last year, which stars Mel Gibson. I can strongly recommend their movies and really do hope that after this conversation you check them out because they are definitely worth your time. Fantastic dialogue and character-driven pieces that are just a lot of fun and very exciting to watch. If you enjoyed this interview and other interviews we've done, please don't forget to tell your friends, subscribe to Booth Talk, and rate and review us on whatever podcast platform you're currently listening to. Anyway, without further ado, here are the Nelms Brothers. Pleasure to meet you, Eshom and Ian, over the phone. This is fantastic. Thanks so much for agreeing to be on the After Movie Diner today. I have to say I watched Small Town Crime and Fatman in the lead up to talking to you both today, and I have to say I'm a huge fan. I just absolutely loved both movies. So thanks so much for doing this.
Oh, awesome, brother. And it's, Small Town Crime beget Fatman. So one is does not happen without the other.
Yeah, and we appreciate you having us on, John. Thank you.
Yeah, well, they worked really well together. I mean, if anyone's looking for a kind of gritty crime drama, but with a strong sense of dark comedy double bill, then these ones back to back are just a sheer delight. So what got you guys' start in the film industry then?
Well, it's the moment or how we became intrigued with it and started pursuing it.
Well, yeah, how you first got intrigued with it and started to pursue it, I guess.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I would say, admittedly, Ian and I sort of got into film, pursuing film as a career a little late in our lives. Ian was going to college. He's an amazing wrestler, and he was wrestling his way through college, and he was majoring in English and literature. And then I was, trying to become a professional paintball player before finally giving up that and going off to art school to pursue a degree in painting, which I ultimately dropped out of. But Ian and I have always been lifelong movie fans, and I just have a reverence for cinema, and our mom and father really fueled that. So our dad owned a photography studio for about 20 plus years, and he shot like local commercials and would always, throw a camera around our necks or make us load the backs for his Hasselblads, or we would shoot pictures from the back of the churches there and all that stuff during weddings.
Probably from about age 10 forward, we were working with our parents as far as, carrying equipment and being the backup camera and just accidentally or through osmosis learning how to light and, learning how to frame get a picture framed properly.
Yeah, composition, color, things like that. We were just around it. So we learned by proxy. And it's interesting because we were doing things as kids that were just, we were just having a gas with, just having fun with. I mean, I remember Ian, we were surrounded by all this video equipment because our dad would be running around shooting little local commercials. And Ian's like, I want to shoot a movie. So he went out and shot a movie, a little short film at 8 years old. And it wasn't anything, it wasn't Spartacus. Right. But, he threw me on a horse and I rode around on the ranch and we edited it together with the guys from work and put music to it, put it in this little science fair and like blew people away. It's pretty much this. But these were just things that we were just doing for fun. I remember a guy at work was like, we love the movie Predator, to this day, but definitely at that age. I mean, we would, eat our Captain Crunch or watch Predator. And I remember the guy was like, well, you guys want to be in Predator? Like, we could shoot some scenes in the backyard and, like, edit you into Predator. I'm like, are you kidding me? So I remember, like, we did that for a couple of weeks. We were, like, running around in camo in the backyard. And then we would, he edited us into Predator. So these were all things we were doing just for fun, but it was never a career. And so flash forward to, but we would go and just a couple other things. Like, our mom was, like, a huge Clint Eastwood fan. And so she would get a new Clint Eastwood classic on VHS every 2 weeks, and we would just wear those suckers out. So we were voraciously watching the Eastwood collection and all these, standout titles of the time, like Indiana Jones, Predator, Terminator, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But you can't really see how those films are made, especially when you're a kid or even when you're an adult and you don't have a lot of education in the film business. You can't really see how Star Wars is being made, you know what I mean, to a certain extent. And especially...
because all the what we know now, and so many people have, but the behind the scenes featurettes and stuff like that has pre-DVD, that didn't exist yet.
Yeah.
So then when all that sort of came, obviously it was a little more eye opening. And I remember when we were in college in the late '90s, early 2000s, I was up really late one night watching these two movies on an IFC Up All Night or something, and I remember I just sort of had this weird paradigm shift. They were two very character driven small films. And I just I was wrapped. I couldn't go to sleep. I couldn't take my eyes off of them. And I called Eshom in the morning and I said, he was in Kansas City at the time and I was in California. And I said, hey, I just watched these two movies last night and they were incredible. And I've kind of had a paradigm shift. And he was like, you're kidding. I watched two movies last night. And unbeknownst to each other, we were sitting in two different states and two different time zones watching the same Up All Night movie session, and we both had a very similar reaction. He also had a sort of paradigm shift, and he was writing a comic book at the time, and I was writing a play at the time, and we just said, we should be making movies. This makes more sense, especially with sort of our background and our passion and what we want to do ultimately.
Yeah, it was kind of miraculous. Those movies were The Real Blonde and The Barfly, which, and they're just great little independent movies. And I remember that summer, on that call, I'm like, okay, I'm coming home for the summer. We're going to steal the parents' camcorder. They have a bunch of video equipment in the garage. We'll see what's relevant. I just got this iMac. We're going to edit it with Final Cut Pro. We made some really bad short films that summer. We wrote a treatment and a query letter. And honestly, from that moment, we were just hooked. I never went back to art school, so I dropped out. And I moved to Bakersfield with Ian
to finish out my last year there.
Yeah.
And we were just, hell-bent driven on trying to figure out how to write, a script and break into the film industry at that point. And so we moved down to LA.
So it felt kind of amazing because all of the skills that we had been accumulating our entire lives had coalesced into this profession.
Yeah.
It suddenly seemed like it just sprung out of nowhere. Oh, wow, I can draw. We can do the storyboards. Ian's major is literature and writing. We can write scripts. Our parents gave us, unwillingly or not, a background in video editing and production. So we had a lot of the tool sets.
And even our dad had his own photo lab. So they would force us to color correct and print the pictures. And at that point, most everything was done on actual film on 35 millimeter Hasselblads. And that's what we were shooting with and that's what we were working with. So we had kind of a vintage or, now nostalgic, experience with film and with coloring it and working on the coloring machines. And so we kind of had that. It wasn't film per se, but it wasn't movie film, but it was film.
It was amazing that all these tool sets came together, coalesced to make a passion of ours an occupation, to make that the opportunity for an occupation.
Yeah. So we moved down to LA in 2002 after I finished school. And we were living on Yucca, which is in Hollywood.
We literally drove into Hollywood, drove 3 exits down, and pulled off and rented an apartment.
100 feet from the freeway. And we just started trying to figure it out because we didn't know anybody, we didn't know anything, and we were just like, okay, how do you do this? And Esh got he was a good artist, but he didn't. It's a little more of a craft as well. The storyboard element. So he came in and he introduced himself to 2 or 3 storyboard companies. And at the time they weren't hiring, nor was he probably fast enough at that point to be able to churn out the boards as quickly as they wanted. I remember them asking him questions. He came home and was like, they wanted to know questions like, how fast can I do this page? And how fast can I do this? And how fast can I do that? And so he was like, oh, it'll take me this long. And they were like, well, that's way too long. You got to be quicker. And so I remember he came home and was practicing how to draw panels quicker. And then I remember, they would throw him the occasional job of someone that would come to them and say, hey, we want you to do a we want to storyboard artist. We want to hire somebody. And they're like, okay, it's whatever.
The day rate is this much.
$700 a day to hire somebody. They're like, well, I don't have that. And they're like, okay, we'll try this guy that we think is good, but we didn't hire because we have a full roster. And so they would give him Eshom's number if they couldn't meet their quota, and then they would give him a call. And we met quite a few up and coming filmmakers that way.
Yeah.
And through that sort of path, we actually met our director of photography, Johnny Durango, who shot almost all of our feature films.
Yeah. And he was, I just remember like going to a couple of the spec commercials that Eshom was doing, like that he was storyboarding, and just trying to get an experience and get an idea of what it was like to make something, and it was cool to see like all the parts functioning, the makeup person, the grips, the doll, the camera crew, and like, yeah, it was really cool.
But we very much had to get day jobs. So I went to work at a movie theater, and Ian got a job
Tony Roma's, which is like a rib joint.
Yeah, no, yeah.
And so with that, within like 18 months of being in Hollywood, and writing, we were writing nonstop.
Well, and we considered film school.
And then we considered film school.
We were like, oh, should we go to film school? So we went over to USC and did the tour. And they're like, if your favorite movies are Star Wars and Indiana Jones, you belong here. And we're like,
that's what I wrote my thesis on, or whatever. That's what I wrote my entrance exam on, or whatever. That's what I got in on. And we're like, oh, great.
And then we went over to UCLA, and they're like, if your favorite movies are Star Wars, get the fuck out of here.
Yeah.
They're like, we don't want any of that commercial shit. We're an art place. You're here to make art films, and you want to do. And we're like, holy shit! And then we went to Los Angeles Film School.
The irony of that is, of course, that Lucas wanted to make art films before he ended up making Star Wars. So.
Yeah, right. And then he ran into Coppola, who was over at UCLA, and they started making some amazing films.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's amazing. And then from there, we went to the Hollywood, what's it called?
LA Film School.
Thank you, LA Film School. Sorry, over in Hollywood. We went to the LA Film School, and they were like, you're not going to, there's a process here. We build you up, and then, by year 4 or whatever, you're going to be holding a camera and be able to actually shoot something. And we're like, oh, my God, whatever their process was, it was too slow for us. And we were just kind of like, okay, let's figure this out. Right around that time, within weeks of us doing that, Eshom gets rear-ended in an accident, which happens basically monthly here in LA. So he gets rear-ended, and instead of taking using the insurance money to fix the car, he decides to. He's pretty handy, actually. He pretty much is his own mechanic, so he decides to fix it himself, and then use the money they got from the insurance to buy the camera at the time, because the DVX 100, which was kind of the first prosumer video. It was still analog. It was digital tapes, but it was the first prosumer camera, that's professional camera, that started looking like
film.
16. It had like a 16 kind of feel to it, and so we bought that camera, and we just started shooting our balls off. I remember we shot 2 feature films and like half a dozen shorts within like a year and a half with that camera.
And just having it opened so many doors for us. It's how we got our introduction to Octavia Spencer. So Kate Taylor, who went on to direct her in The Help, was shooting a short film with producer Brunson Green. And we just met them at a party, and we were like, oh yeah, we just got this DVX 100 camera, and we're shooting some, independent movies. And they were like, oh, well shit, we might need to borrow that. And we're like, we just met these guys and borrow it. Like, what do you borrow shit? What are you guys doing? Like, we're working on a short film. We got Octavia Spencer, and Allison Janney, Melissa McCarthy, and we're like, holy smokes! And we'll work on it, but we're going to operate. We'll come and shoot, and we shot that for free. We just came out and would go on the Weekend Warrior it with them and go shoot that stuff for free on the Renegade style.
Or I remember this one time where Tate and Brunson, who also produced The Help, they were a team there for a while, and I remember Brunson called us and was like, hey, Tate and I just found this found footage at their friend worked at a news place, and they were leasing footage of car chases. So they went over there and they looked through a bunch of car chases, and they wanted this aerial helicopter footage of this red. They were trying to find anything that they could find. They found this red Geo Metro or something that was then they matched one for sale on a car dealership, and they were like, oh look, we can go buy this same make and model and color, and we'll be and we can use this, we can lease this footage from the news place, and it'll look like we're in an aerial chase, with the helicopter following us. And so that's what they did. I remember they just called us on like a Wednesday, and they're like, "We just got this car, this news footage. We need to come in and do the close-up.
Yeah.
You guys okay to do that?" We're all, "Hell yeah!"
I don't even think Tate bought it. I think he was like, "Oh, I'm going to do a test drive.
You might be
like,
right.
I'll meet you guys around the corner." You know,
might be right.
Like, okay.
But it was literally,
Oh, that's great.
He literally jumped in the car, and we jumped on the other side, and he drove around, and we just shot him as he's looking out the window up into the sky as if a chopper's following him, and then he just added the sound and used the other shots. You know, it was pretty great. It was very inventive and very smart. But
that's awesome.
Yeah, and that was a lot of fun because when that short came out, it actually won like 20 some odd film festivals and was up for an Academy Award. It could have been nominated if they wanted to submit it and put the money behind it. They ended up ultimately not doing that, but yeah, it just opened so many doors for them. It opened a lot of doors for us, you know, getting to know them and their sort of crew, and it gave us a lot of experience because we shot half of that short film. It was like 25 minutes long or something like that, and we shot all the flashback sequences, which was kind of the bulk of the film.
Yeah, and we'd be going to festivals,
right.
and Ian and I had a little, you know, a small independent feature that we had done, and that would be playing
alongside
at the same time within the same festival. So you had this like short film with, you know, all these actors of note, and then our like little independent film. But it was really cool to go around on the circuit that year and have two.
And that's kind of how it worked. We had that camera, and we decided, let's shoot a feature film. So I think we talked about an idea, and then I sat and wrote it in like 3 weeks. And I remember Eshom reading it and going, I think we could make a movie out of this. It wasn't very good, but, you know, it wasn't very good as far as like, you know, the stuff we were writing was like Mad Max, and like we were all pumped to do these like giant films, and then here I was writing something we could shoot for $5.
Yeah.
But we were like, okay, well, we had no money. We shot the whole thing for I think $1,500.
$1,500 within 7 days.
And we were like, okay, well,
days.
You know, we can't build any sets. Where do we shoot it? So we set it in the woods, and you know, it was like all of, you know, what we could find, what we could get.
And all the actors we had were people we pulled out of Tony Roma's and the movie theater, all aspiring actors. And it was a crew of 3 people. It was me, Eshom, and our dad. And our dad, you know, packed it was a hike into the set because we were shooting in, you know, by a river, and they were kind of camping, it was about college students, junior college students specifically, getting back to nature.
Is this Lost on Purpose?
No, this one is called Squirrel Trap.
Oh.
And Squirrel Trap.
Oh, okay. So this is going back to 2004.
Oh,
okay.
Way back.
But Squirrel Trap, it was basically a bunch of junior college students who were trying to write a paper on Thoreau. So they took like a 3-day weekend and went out and tried to write their papers while camping was kind of the idea. And of course, you know,
one of them kind of loses it.
One of them kind of loses his shit, and it almost turns into like a bad thriller, but it stays the course and stays that we called it like a comedic thriller because it had all these moments that were kind of inspired by Breakfast Club, you know, like these 5 people out there trying to figure their shit out. And then it also had these kind of a little more darker elements when the guy goes off his meds and everyone's trying to figure out if he's, you know,
gone native
or what. And he starts kind of stalking them. And it was fun. We had a blast, and all the people in it did a really great job. And we got into about half a dozen film festivals with that $1,500 films. We did all the post ourselves on like an iMac in the living room.
Yeah, and this is where the day like we just cracked the book, the Final Cut Pro book open, and took a week to read it, and then just started clicking buttons.
Just started figuring it out, and so we edited the whole thing, and then we sent it into 20 film festivals. You know, didn't get into the giant film festivals, but the one that we did get into, the biggest one, was called the Palm Beach International Film Festival. It was like a top, probably 10 at the time. It was like a top 10 in like 04, 05. And it was really cool because when the year we went there, like Bai Ling and Woody Harrelson were there for a little movie that they were in or that they were pushing there. And it was kind of like legit. We're like, oh, wow. Like then there was audience, you know, it had built-in audience. Like we went to our screening and, you know, even though we had nobody in our film, like 50 people showed up for it. And, you know, we watched it with an audience and they were laughing through it in the right places. And we were getting nervous and, you know, feeling like we had to go home and cut, you know, because it was moving slow. So we went home and cut 10 minutes out of it. It was just, overall, just an amazing, eye-opening experience. Because we just went, you know, and now we're like, oh, if you get into a film festival, you got to do promotion. You got to do this. You got to get that. You got to hire a publicist. Like, we didn't do anything. We just went. And then we were like, oh, shit, we didn't do this right at all.
Yeah. I can say it's also interesting with sort of every step of the way that you're talking about and every kind of part of your story. I'm seeing exactly how that all plays into the 2 films of you that I have seen. You know, from walking the tightrope between, you know, dark darkly comic and drama to, learning how to edit and do the pacing and all that stuff that paid off in your later films. But yeah, no, I'm every time you're telling another story, I'm hearing like, oh, and that's how they ended up doing that. Like I'm filling in the blanks.
Yeah, I mean that's and honestly, that's one of the craziest things. Is it's funny when people watch, our movies, our last couple of movies, because they're a little bigger and they have bigger casts. Well, a lot bigger than $1,500, but they have, like actors that their names or you've seen their faces and you're like, oh, I love that person or whatever. Or we actually had a budget to make it, but you're right in that it still has that same voice or that tone to it. And it's funny because when we first started making movies, like, we didn't go to school for it, and we didn't, there was nobody like guiding, like, oh, it has to be a straight comedy, or, oh, hey, this has to be a horror genre. Like, what is your genre? What is your voice? There was none of that in our heads when we were writing and making stuff. And we were kind of, I guess you could say, free.
Basically what we like.
Yeah, we were just free to make whatever we wanted, because our first film was $1,500, which we funded ourselves, and it actually got into a couple festivals, and we had a blast. And then we did a $5,000 feature film with some friends of ours, where everyone shot a 20-minute section of it, and we cut it together like traffic and found a cohesive beginning and ending to cut them all together. That was called Night of the Dog.
And that one, we were fortunate.
Night of the Dog.
Yeah, and that one we were fortunate enough that it came together well enough that outside interest, like we got representation, we got managers, we got agents, like they all called after that movie. Miramax called, Focus called.
Because not only were we getting into a lot of those B-plus film festivals, but we ended up winning a ton of them. Like we won a big award at Santa Barbara. We won a big award. We won the audience award at Palm Beach that very next year.
And I think part of that was just our love and passion for cinema. I mean, we all showed up together, the group of us, there was 6 of us, all collaborators, and we'd all put on like goofy shirts that all matched and just, have a blast at the festival and just try to represent the film.
And we were so broke because we were all working at movie theaters and restaurants that, like, we all 6 of us stayed in the same hotel room. All 6 in one hotel room because we just couldn't afford to do it any other way. And I remember, like when we went to Palm Beach, they only gave us like 2 passes, because they pretty much they take care of you pretty well at Palm Beach. I mean at Santa Barbara, they did at Palm Beach as well. They take care of you well at Santa Barbara. They still do. And I remember, like, it was our first film festival that was like really taking care of us, and they had it, but it was kind of like you have to have this pass because Santa Barbara's kind of a nice city and it's got a bunch of nice places, so they give you these passes to go in and get food at certain places. And I remember, like, there were 6 of us, but we only had 2 food passes, so we would just go like into the prayer party and into the big party, the filmmakers parties at night. So we would just have to pass our badges back and forth until we got everybody in. It was ridiculous. Or we befriended a bunch of filmmakers. I remember we went into one party, and then we befriended these other filmmakers, and then they gave us all their passes. We went out and got everybody else in, like our rest of our team.
Oh, that's funny.
But if there was like a free drink being served within 2 miles of the festival, we were there.
We would sniff it out.
Like, oh, there it is.
Honestly, if there was like a free candy bar being given out, we would seek that out because we were all starving and broke, and all our budgets were like, okay, we're going to be there for 4 days. I've got $100 to make it through the 4 days.
Oh my gosh! Yeah.
So it was like every ounce of dollar we had was poured into it. But we had a blast. We learned a ton about not only what it takes to get a film, make it more exciting for an audience. Because I remember when we did Night of the Dog, that was one of our biggest focuses. Was like, this has to be fucking wall to wall entertainment. Like, we have to go hard, and everybody did. And
yeah, one of the things I was going to say is that you're one of the biggest strengths out of the 2 films I watched of you guys is the stories and the way that, unlike a lot of, I end up watching a lot of sort of mid-range indies, right? Not super indie and not super Hollywood, but like these sort of the mid-range indies. And so many of them can be so slow, right? And that's fine for a lot of people. Like, there was a trend for a while where a lot of films just had people in wife beater vests staring out of windows, and that made a movie. And it was fine, but it wasn't particularly exciting. What's incredible with your guys' stuff that appealed to me so much, because I love a good story and I love good structure, but I also love great dialogue. And it was the fact that 2/3 of both of the movies that we're talking about, Small Town Crime and Fatman, 2/3 of them are essentially people in rooms talking, even though, they're all driving the plot forward. But every single scene is engaging. Every single scene is pushing it forward. Every single scene is just keeping the pace up and keeping the energy up. And you can really see where you've done that homework and that research and that work to be able to make, great actors saying good dialogue gets you so far, but like having that structure and having that pacing just ramps it up to a whole other level.
Thank you.
That's something I definitely recognized in the two movies.
Awesome, brother. Thank you so much. Now, we try to make them as tight as possible. We try not to be too extraneous with the words and try not to overindulge, but
those moments happen. There's definitely moments where we're like, you know what, you could cut this 15 seconds out, but I just love it or whatever. I remember just in talking about a scene from Fatman. I remember we had this amazing experience, and it was an amazing experience overall with Mel, but he had this amazing experience where we passed him our cut of it, and we said, hey, we'd love to get your thoughts on this. This is kind of our cut, and this is what we're, basically going to pass to the distributor in like a month, And Eshom and I were still doing all these little test screenings with 5 to 10 people at a time virtually at that point. We were just passing it to 5 to 10 people and they're following up with phone calls, but which we usually like to get them in a room and have them watch it together so we can get a little bit of crowd response.
Right.
And then do a Q&A afterwards and like try to make sure all of our arcs and our structures working and our characters are functioning on multiple levels and that people are entertained. But anyway, we passed this thing to Mel and we're like, hey, we'd love to get your thoughts. And so he watched it and he was like, hey,
comes back super positive.
He was like, I loved it. Like,
we were like, woo!
Like, yeah, first of all, it's like, thank God. But he was like, I loved it. It was so awesome. Like he went through it. We talked probably for like an hour with him and then his,
and he had like watched it with his daughter and like his housekeeper and like his girlfriend. His girlfriend. Yeah.
Yeah. And they had all watched it together and they said they were just laughing their asses off and having a great time. And then we were like, well, look, he's like, I'm happy with it. If you guys are good with it, I'm good with it. We're like, all right, amazing. He's like, yeah, I'm really excited. That's awesome. He's like, I'm very excited. I'm very excited.
And we're like, well, do you have any notes at all?
And he's like, Ash was like, well, look, you have any refrigerator moments, while you're, in the shower or whatever, kind of thing. You think of something, please give us a ring because we're always looking to improve it. He's like, all right, yeah, great. We're like, we still have 3 or 4 weeks before we turn it in. He's like, okay.
So he calls us like 2 days later and he's like, okay, I've watched it 3 additional times and I've seen a couple things. And then we're like, oh, amazing. Well, what is it?
Tell us.
Yeah. And he's like, well, you think I could just come over? Because we edited the movie in Ian's basement.
Because of COVID, that's how we were going to do it anyway. Yeah, especially since COVID, we couldn't get out of my basement.
Right.
So he says, can I just come over? Because he'd actually already had COVID back in April. And we were like, well, yeah, if you're fine with that. He's like, I'd love to. I'll come over.
I got the antibodies. I'm good.
I got the antibodies. Don't worry. We're like, all right, shit. So he comes over. He comes over the next morning at like 9 or 10 a.m. and stays for like 10 hours.
Shows up with his protein shake.
His protein shake. He comes over and he stays for like 9 or 10 hours, and we just go, scene by scene through the movie, and he's just throwing suggestions at us, and we're just screwing around with him, trying to see if some of his ideas will work, because obviously he didn't have a working edit to work with. He's just thinking of things as he's watching it and writing things down. So when he came, he had kind of like it was all in his head. He didn't have a notepad, but he was just kind of like, okay, this scene right here, let's try this. If you guys are okay, let's try this. He's like, and the great thing about him is he was like this on set too. He's like, if you don't like any of this shit we're trying, just put it back. I'm happy with the film as it is. We're like, okay. But it was a real kind of master class in like going through and seeing what his mind's eye was finding as superfluous, or what if we cut from this to this instead of that? What if we cut that one little shot out? Let's see how that works, Or it was really cool.
Some of the stuff works really great, and some of it was like, go back to what it was.
Yeah, and some of that would happen on the day. We would sit there and move through something with him for 45 minutes, working on a couple of edits in a scene, and then he would go, I fucked that up. Go back to what you guys had. We're like, okay. Or maybe keep that one edit and go back to what you guys had. And then we'd get on another scene, and he'd cut, 15 seconds out of it, and we're like, hey, we actually think that's better. We're going to keep that.
We also ended up trimming about 5 minutes out of the movie with that.
Yeah, in 5 minutes.
And lost nothing.
Lost nothing.
That's what was kind of brilliant about it. So,
and that's what he was trying to do, because he was like, I don't think there's anything that really needs to be cut in here. He's like, I like everything. He's like, I just think that we need to, maybe this will help and maybe it won't. He's like, but let's try to like tighten it up in a couple areas. We're like, okay. So yeah, that was a really amazing experience to do that with him. And we got a lot out of it. So
how did he come to the movie? How did he come to Fatman? I mean, I want to get back to Small Town Crime as well, but as we're on the subject, and I'm Mel Gibson in his prime fan, and I also loved him in this. Talk about like getting him on board and the thought process behind who was going to play Kris Kringle, and then finding out Mel was interested, or however that happened. Talk me through that process.
For sure. Well, first of all, look, we are huge Mel Gibson fans as well, right? Like Mad Max is standout above
Lethal Weapon series, biblical.
There's so many good ones, Signs. I mean, it's just amazing what the man's done, and Braveheart.
And his own catalog of films that he's made, from Hacksaw Ridge to Braveheart, are just incredible. Stuff's amazing.
Obviously, we wrote the script 14 years ago and had a very different cast in mind. But when we went to a screening of Hacksaw Ridge in 2016, we saw Mel came out to do a Q&A, and he had this beautiful kind of feral beard, and he was kind of kneading it and running his fingers through
it. He was at the end of the big Hollywood, awards run with it, because he'd gotten a couple of nominations here and there, and the Oscars were coming up, and obviously he'd been on, not only finished the film recently, but he was at the end of this awards run that was exhausting. And so he's doing this Q&A, and he's kind of, shoulders are kind of rolled forward. He's eating his beard, but the passion in the eyes is still 1,000% as he's talking about the movie. And that was kind of, if we were able to endow that character, Kris, upon the man right then and there, it just kind of we just really felt like he could embody that character, especially since he had this kind of, tired exterior, but fierce interior. We were just like, oh my God, that's the guy, the passion in the eyes, but you can still see that he's, that it's been a rough road, he's a little worn down. We're like, all right, awesome. It felt like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, is the way we were sort of talking about it at the time.
Cut to 2 years later, we've got producers, and they're like, who do you want? Like, it's Mel Gibson. We've been holding on to this idea of Gibson for 2 years, and they were like, okay, let's go to him. So we wrote him a letter, sent it off and crossed our fingers and toes and hoped for the best. And it's been a couple of weeks, and we were like, oh,
I don't know if he's going to do it. I don't know if he's even interested. I mean, what were we thinking? Mel Gibson playing Santa Claus? What are we more on?
So it was like, okay, well, who else do you want? And we were downtrodden, and then we had been fielding emails and stuff like that coming from people like, hey, let's talk about the movie. And then this email.
Production companies and finance companies that we were talking with, we'd probably talked to 20 or 30 of them that were interested in putting some financing or doing something on the movie. So we were talking to them, fielding emails with them, doing phone calls with them, taking meetings. And I remember this email came through, and it was like, hey, I read the script. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really funny. Let's have a chin wag. And we were like, chin wag? I've never even heard that phrase before. So we were like,
and this email is a pseudonym. It doesn't say Mel Dude 25, right? It doesn't say that. So we have no idea who it is.
Right.
So he didn't sign off either. So I wrote him back, and I was like, hey, thank you so much, thinking it was another financier or producer. And I was just like, would love to chat with you. Who am I speaking with? And he went, oh, sorry, sometimes I forget to sign off. This is Mel. And we were just like, holy shit,
I think we definitely hugged.
We definitely hugged. We were just really excited, of course, because it's it's like the number one person,
the legend
you were pumped about, has a great reaction to it. And then our agents start to talk to his agents, and they're just like, okay, well, look, Mel's around this weekend or whatever. You have 45 minutes with him in this cafe. And we're like, okay. So
we worked on our pitch. We got it down.
Right. We go into this cafe, and we hang, and 3.5 hours later, we emerge, really in sync. And it was just a great conversation. It was great because he was just so open about everything. We got to talk to him about life and love and films and his films. And then we talked about Fatman a bunch. And it was a really great conversation. We felt really synced up, and we really felt like we knew we had the right guy. And I know that the penultimate moment for both of us was when he was talking about that scene where he's standing on the balcony looking out over the Elves. And he's like, I just think that that's a really important scene, and that this is a big emotional moment for me. And I feel so horrible that I have to tell them this, that I'm about ready to cry. And we're all, yeah, exactly. He's like, and then that's what's going to be so funny about it. And we're all, exactly. So it was like he immediately, after, I don't know how many times he'd read it before he sat down. It was probably once or twice, but he immediately got the tone we were after talking to him for a little while about it. And we probably just said something like, we were probably going back and forth talking about our grounded, our expectations of hopefully keeping it really grounded. And we know there's some comedic moments in there, but we don't want to play for them. We want to sort of, underplay those and just go for the reality and the drama of it. And he was like, oh, yeah, I love that. And then he starts talking about scenes in the movie and how he's going to play him. And we're just like, oh, my God. Like, he's
like, I see this guy's an old cowboy.
Yeah,
which is,
man.
Exactly. Right. Like, we grew up in the Central Valley, California, which is, ranchers and
dairy farmers,
dairymen and all this stuff. And, like, it's very much, one of those ranchers plucked out of the Central Valley and, set in North Peak.
We saw Santa as, the approach was like putting him as a real person, like a blue collar worker, and having just as much plight and, as many problems as those folks were having or have all the time, and it felt like that when we were writing the script. I remember we just felt like that would in a real world, like Santa would have similar problems to normal people. He just would, because there was just the bureaucracy of what he does and in the problems of keeping, like, his responsibility and his need to be benevolent and his need to be giving. It just, no one's perfect, he's not. It's not like he's God. He's a human being with some saintly features, but he's still a human being. So if he was a real person, that's just kind of how we envisioned him and kind of how we broke him down.
Yeah, it's fantastic because you use all sorts of different tropes in order to make these sort of wonderful commentary about lots of things. I mean, it's a satire at its heart, really, and there's lots of things you're commenting on, about society and about Christmas and about the military and about America in general, which all plays out incredibly well. But the whole thing is acted and directed and shot as if it was not a standard, but just a generic kind of gritty action, movie in a certain kind of crime vein, which it has to be in order for all the other things to work. And, what I was talking about earlier about you guys skirting a line, what you seem to be incredibly deft at doing, and it was so impressive while watching Fat Man in particular, is there was a point where you could have pushed it and it would have been really ridiculous, especially around the elves, I guess. Like, if you'd pushed the elves too far one way or too far the other way, especially with a lot of the other Christmas movies out there, most notably Elf, I would imagine, but also with other movies that feature them, you could have really gone one way or another. And the line that you tread with that just humanizes the whole thing. And it's wonderful that on one hand the story is about Santa's struggle with modern America and all the bureaucracy of it, and on the other hand it's this sort of larger than life crime caper with an assassin, and Walton Goggins, his whole role and his whole storyline, and the way that you blended them together and put them together was fantastic. And yeah, playing it straight was entirely the right way to go. And it just, having Mel Gibson on board and knowing that he understood it and got that, really, just helped sell the whole film.
What I would say tonally, like, that tonal sale wasn't the easiest thing to do. I mean, we actually ended up losing a couple of opportunities because of the tone that we were seeking. They wanted us to tip it more in the elf direction, or
right.
Tip it. Yeah, they were like I remember one suggestion was like, yeah, hey, can you, like, this should be a lot sillier and stupider, and we're like, and really play into the
funner. I think they said,
the fun element of it. Where it was like, that's not the movie we want to make. There's already there's already so many movies that tip in that direction in a way, and it may not involve a gritty Santa, but like, I've already seen that. I don't want to be.
Yeah, and it misses the point of the script. Like, if you're going to do that, then you're completely missing the satire and the comedy in the script, which Hollywood does all the time, it seems. But so I'm glad you guys held firm and made the film you wanted to, because it's a far more satisfying film because of it. I imagine in my head that they wanted to turn it into the Santa action parody from the beginning of Scrooged, the night the reindeer died, or whatever that parody is at the beginning.
I think you're exactly 100% on point.
Yeah.
I think the other, and it was funny because there was a couple other versions too, where I remember there was one financier that was like, hey, we really want to do this, but we feel like Billy should go along on the ride and be like, kind of a buddy film between Billy and the skinny man. And we're like, no, like that doesn't work.
What? Like, guns with kids? Like, wait, what?
How the fuck is that going to work? And they're like, well, yeah, you'd have to really tone that down, and there wouldn't be as much violence at the end. And we're like, okay, we're out. That's not going to work.
Thank you for your time.
Where in the script, when he picks up his phone and it says, like, little shit or whatever it says on this phone, do they think that he wants to go riding along in the car with the kid? Like, the kid's awful.
No, exactly. That's why we were just like, that goes against everything that guy would want to go.
But I think it was, like, steered in the direction which they wanted, which was, a kind of a sillier, like, farcical Bad Santa tone. You know what I'm saying? Like, that was kind of...
There was a flickering character.
There was a lot of pressure to sort of take it that way, and it just we never saw the movie that way, so we could never abide by it.
And thank goodness, we actually found a couple of people that really liked our ideas and our vision for it, and we picked, Fortitude International, and they were great. Nadine DeBarros actually runs that company, and she was fantastic, man. She really got after watching like Small Town Crime, and that was kind of the key. Like we would watch, like they would, I remember we've had this script for 14 years, and we would go into meetings with this thing, and we always felt like after the meeting, we always felt like they just wanted to have the meeting to see who the sick bastards were that wrote the script. And like, they weren't really interested in making it.
Like, what maniacs are going to walk through the door?
Yeah. And we would have these wonderful meetings with people where we'd all laugh and have a good time about what the script could be or was going to be or how badass it was going to be or whatever. But ultimately, no one would sort of pony up and make it. And it was basically because we didn't have anything to sort of point to say, this is the tone of it.
The tonal equivalent.
Yeah. And finally, we got to make Small Town Crime. And after we made that movie, that script became a whole different animal for people. Like we would go into meetings, they would read it, we'd go into meetings and they'd be like, I love Small Town Crime. What's the tone of this? And we're like, it's just like Small Town Crime. And they're like, fucking awesome. We're like, all right, great. So yeah, people were, they understood it now since we had something we could point to.
And we honestly didn't, I mean, that we actually got to make this movie is pretty surreal. I remember we were sitting on the set and like, they were like, it's coming over the walkies. Can the elves, Kris Kringle, Mrs. Claus, and the military please come to set? And we're like, I cannot believe people are allowing us to make this bananas movie.
Probably the most surreal moment for me was when Mel and Walton were facing off just before that big shootout at the end.
Yeah.
Because Esh and I wrote that scene, and we thought it would be so much fun. This moment, this sort of Leone Western shootout at the end, we were so excited to make it. And hearing no for like 14 years, we were just like, God, I don't know if we're ever going to get to make this because it's like I for some reason people just aren't seeing it. Like they're just not seeing what we're seeing. And thank goodness we made Small Town Crime and people were able to get excited about it. But that was really the most surreal moment for me because that shootout at the end when they're facing each other, it really played out in kind of real time. I mean, we shot it, a dozen times, 6 from one side, 6 from the other, but it really was two people standing that far apart, yelling at each other and delivering these lines passionately. There are no, with Mel and Walton, there are no like sandbag takes. You know what I mean?
Right.
and then the whole world just seemed to conspire for this beautifully cinematic moment with the snow falling and everything. And like, the day, like that just landed on the day. It was pretty miraculous. And it was gave us chills. It was really,
it was amazing. It was amazing.
And so going back to Small Town Crime, then the movie that got you to make Fatman or was a great calling card for Fatman. As you talked about earlier, you had met Octavia Spencer earlier in your career, and she's on board as an executive producer of Small Town Crime. So talk about that, getting that one up and running, especially after Waffle Street. And I haven't seen Waffle Street, but I did watch the trailer, and it's on my list to watch. But Waffle Street seems far more sort of family and upbeat and more true life and all that sort of stuff. And obviously Small Town Crime and Fatman are more of a piece or more of maybe more you. I don't know whether they're more you. But talk about kind of that journey into Small Town Crime and bringing Octavia on board.
It really starts... I'll do a quick digression.
Like Lost on Purpose,
because it's really important to get a context. So after Night of the Dog, we got representation, and we started writing for like 3 years we wrote. And we wrote, obviously we'd been rewriting Fatman because we had it for so long. But so we had Fatman, and we had Small Town Crime, and we had another one, which I won't mention because we're going to be making it, I think, within a couple of years, because it's something we're super pumped about. But we had these 3 movies that were similar in tone, that we'd written within the course of those 3 years. And we were pumped about doing them, and we took a lot of great meetings with them, but no one would do them because, again, we just had this fucking crazy tone in there, and these $1,500 and $5,000 movie wasn't enough for anybody to like jump out of their seats and start throwing money at us. So they were like, these are cool, you know, and like
someone's going to make these.
Someone's going to make these one day. And we're like, well, we are. They're like, well, no, you got to do something with some actors and some people know. So they're like, they have some confidence, and with a budget and a crew, like, you know, you and your dad, that's not really giving me a lot of confidence, and I'm going to give you a couple $1 million to go do something. So we're like, okay. So after 3 years of writing and having those sort of 3 scripts in our back pocket, which we'd gotten around town with and gotten a lot of great meetings out of,
and almost had them set up.
Almost had them set up a couple of times. Almost. But we really couldn't get that momentum to push us over that apex, which is kind of what you need. You know, the writing can only take you so far, to be honest.
Get it to tip.
Yeah, or like, you know, you get like an Oliver Stone or a Tarantino or someone to take interest in you and like come on board to either produce or direct it. Like that really helps you, but we couldn't quite get that. We couldn't quite get that X factor. So we were like, all right, well, we need to make something. We need to make something, because we hadn't made something in 3 years. We're like, we need to make something that's kind of like, and we were very passionate about films like, you know, American Graffiti and HUD and Last Picture Show, and movies that we felt represented, like, you know, the sort of, not necessarily the era we grew up in, but the sort of lifestyle we grew up in, which was very kind of rural and, you know, off the beaten path cities with Merle's type diners, you know, like, like that Milkshake Diner still existed in the 90s and 80s when we were growing up in Visalia. It was called Merle's instead of Mel's, but it was literally on the strip, you know, and people were still cruising, and that was like, people were lost in a time in the valley.
Yeah.
And so we felt very akin to those movies. And there's a lot of cowboys around there. There's a lot of ranches and a lot of like we grew up on a horse ranch. So, I mean,
so Ian had been teaching swimming lessons in LA this whole time, and he had saved up a little money, like $50,000.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking
with a lot of money.
We're talking like 5 or 6 years of saving with the singular idea, not, I'm going to get a car or a house, but with the singular idea that we could put it into a movie. And so we put the $50,000 down, and we just said, we're going to make something with this $50,000. It'd be nice to be able to make something bigger, but this is all we got. And
we'll figure out how to make it for $50,000 if that's all we
That's what we end up doing. And we'd also become friends with James Lafferty, just actually exchanging scripts. And we liked his writing because we shared a manager, and he liked our writing. So we had this meeting at like a sushi joint, and we were just talking about our writing and how we were pumped about his scripts and how he was pumped about our scripts. And then after the meeting, we were like, wait a minute, he would make a really good Fever. Randall is the proper name, but is Rooker. I'm sorry, Rooker and Fever is the character that he plays in Lost on Purpose. And we're like, he'd be great in that role. And he was like in his 8th season or 9th season of One Tree Hill. So he was a working actor. He'd been, you know, on the show for damn near a decade at that point. And we called him up and we said, hey, like a day later, and we're like, it was great sitting down with you, but like, we've got this script, like, that we didn't pass you yet. And it's like a small film that we're working on, and we'll probably be done with it in a couple of weeks. Do you mind if we pass it to you after we're done? We'd love you to play one of the roles in it. And he said, well, yeah, pass it to me. Okay. And he actually grew up in a really small town like we did, outside LA, called Hemet. And we passed him this script, and he called us a couple days later, and he's like, man, I really, really responded to this script. He's like, it felt like my little hometown. And we're like, no shit. He's like, yeah. And so he came on to play the lead, basically.
And that helped us go out and get, like, James Kasmarek, Thomas Howell, and then we had Octavia come and do a little cameo for us.
And Dale Dickey, and, like, all these just great characters. Jeremy Rashford, like, all these guys we still work with today. But just these great character actors that just swung in because, you know, they read the script and saw that we had a little bit of talent on board and were inspired by, like, okay, well, let's see what this is. That I remember Thomas Howell sitting down with us the day before shooting, and he's like, you know why I signed on to this? We're like, we have no idea. He's like, I signed on to this because I read the script and I went, what the hell genre is this?
It's like an anti-genre movie.
It's like an anti-genre movie. We're all, that's awesome. He's all, I just thought all these people are signing up for this. I really respect a lot of these people's work that are in this. And he's like, and I'm like, and I'm reading it, and I'm thinking, there's got to be something to this. And so when we're out there doing the scenes with him and Jane, like he was on, man. He and Jane were just like fire together. They were wonderful. But everybody was bringing their A game. You know what I mean? Like nobody was there to sandbag out a performance. Like everybody was like basically working for scale.
Yeah, we had no money, so no one was there for the money.
And just excited to like try something new or try something raw or try something with these crazy kids that had this idea about making a film about dairy farms and the people who were, living on them. So they came out and gave us 1,000%. And the movie, I think, obviously shines for it because we had such great performances and we only had like $200,000 total. And,
I remember our DP helped raise like $90,000.
Half of it. Yeah.
And produced it. And then I remember at one point we were shooting, I don't know, we're like 3/4 of the way through production and Ian comes up to me and he goes, okay, I don't want to alarm you, but we're going to run out of money. And I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah, it might not be today, might not be tomorrow, but unless we get another $20,000, like we're not going to be able to finish the show. And we're like,
then some local folks came in Visalia in our hometown and said, hey, we know you need a little more cash. Like we're here for you. We're gonna give you an extra $20,000 and get you through this. And we're like, holy shit. So, and they became investors in the film. Obviously, they just hand over a check for $20,000, but they became investors in the film and really, really pushed us. We had our backup plan was we've got a credit card that we're just going to charge to hell and back, or a couple credit cards. And
it would be like 4 because none of us had an account over $5,000 at that point.
So we knew we could finish. We knew we could finish shooting, and that really was the goal. So we knew we could get it in the can and then go back to our day jobs and work it off if we had to. But thank goodness those folks came in and kind of saved the day.
Yeah.
But from that movie, it took us like 6 months in post. Or maybe even longer, 10 months in post, because it was really the first big movie with a lot of footage, with a lot of characters that we kind of had to figure out. Everything else was we barely had enough footage to put the movies together. And finally in this movie, we had a 35-day shoot and we just had
4K red
footage and like everything had to be transferred and categorized and put in bins and edited properly and organized properly. Whereas the other ones, you had a scene and you had like 4 edits in it and you would just kind of slap it together because you only had 2 takes because the cops showed up and kicked you out of the place before you get any more shooting. So this is like the first real movie with a real amount of footage that we had. And it took us like 10 months to figure out the organization of it, and we were really being really picky, really precious with it for good reason, I think. And then we got into we got into a lot of festivals. We won probably about 20 awards with it, like B+ festivals. There was no South by or Sundance, but we won like 20 B+ film festivals with it. That kind of Palm Beach level of back in the day, or that Santa Barbara level.
And then I would say, like, what directly leads to Waffle Street is this. I remember our dad watches it, and he comes up to us, and he goes, okay, I really like the movie. Good job, guys. Can you use any other words than fuck? And we were like...
Because it had these young kids in it that were sort of just out of high school, and they, and even Mrs. Liz, even the Jane Kasmerick,
they were profane.
Yeah, they were profane, which is kind of a lot of people in the area.
It was true to the region and true to our experience.
It was very true to how we grew up and the people that we grew up with. So
we're like, okay. And then I remember Waffle Street came to us like, because of Small Town Crime, someone had watched it at a film festival.
Lost on Purpose.
Yes, thank you. Lost on Purpose had watched it at a film festival, and they came to us and said, hey,
how much did you make that for?
How much did you make that for? We're like, it's like $250. And they're like, holy smokes. Okay, we've like optioned this book. It's based on, it's Waffle Street. It's based on this financier's life. And, are you interested in doing that? And that's when I looked at each other and we read the book and we're like, okay, like this could be an opportunity for us to do like a clean routine movie.
Because it was a clean movie, the book was kind of he's a Mormon guy, so he's not cussing like a sailor in it. And like all the anecdotes are funny. They're very funny and very real.
And then also Ian and I had a lot of experience in the waiter game. So
we were excited to do that because we'd been serving tables for so freaking long and we hadn't been able to sort of, exercise our events, So that was really fun too. And Jimmy's experience is a lot like anybody's experience that's in the waiting business. You kind of get beat up a little bit. So as he's trying to sort of learn to be a real boy. And so that was, we framed it as a Pinocchio story. It's about a guy who, is living in a fantasy world of, making a lot of money, spending a lot of money. And then he gets fired from his finance job.
Is a trader job.
And then he has to go work at a Waffle House, or he chooses to work at a Waffle House. And then as he's working at a Waffle House, he meets Danny Glover, the surly line cook, who sort of, straightens him out because the guy's got a ridiculous point of view on finance, like a grounded.
Got a bit of a stick up his keister.
Yeah. So Danny breaks him down and makes him back into a real boy. And then this guy pops out the other side of it, doing better, with a much better path in mind.
And I think the most intriguing thing about Waffle Street is when we said we were going to do it, our representation was like, we don't agree with that. And we're like, well, it's the first time we're not going to have to pay to make a movie.
Yeah, they had the finance. They had like $500,000.
Right.
And we were like, well, look, like, here's the things we like about it and why we want to do it. And they were like, yeah, but it doesn't lead to the thrillers. It doesn't lead to those 3 thrillers we're all excited about that you have. And we were like, well, look, it's a chance for us to practice our craft. We're really excited about the script, that we can write, and we think it's going to be a lot of fun. There's a lot of stuff in here that like we've lived through that this thing correlates with. And they were like, well, I think we need to part ways. And so we lost all of our representation, and then we said, fuck it. And we stepped in to make that movie.
Oh, wow.
And
Really? That's
they
crazy.
Literally fired us. And we said, the one thing we told the financiers, the producers on Waffle Street, is we said, if you'll promise us that you'll make the movie after we write the script, we'll write the script for free. And so they said, okay, we promise we'll do it, because they liked our pitch. So we wrote the script, and within 6 months, it was literally took us like 3 months to write the script. And then 3 months after that, we were shooting and casting down in Utah. And it was crazy. It was such a quick turnaround.
Yeah.
But it was well worth it. We had a great experience. There's definitely a special place in our heart for that film and the people that we worked on it with. And another thing that came out of that movie, lo and behold, was that a couple of the producers in there said, hey.
Well, yeah, because we got to the end of it. We had a very successful run.
Then we sold it.
It played really well for audience.
It went on just similarly as Lost on Purpose. It won a bunch of film festivals, a bunch of B-plus film festivals, and then sold because it had Danny in it and James, and they were a little more commercial than our last film. The idea was more commercial than our last film. Yeah. But it sold right away to Vista. And so the producers came to us and they said, hey, that was a great experience. Like, what else do you guys have? Do you have any scripts that you're excited about? And we said, well, we've got these crime thrillers. It's nothing like Waffle Street, but take a read at this one we love, that's kind of the entry level, budget wise. It's the one we can do for the least, called Small Town Crime. Nice. So they read it, they loved it, they passed it up to the financiers, and the financiers loved it. And their one stipulation was, hey, can you find some talent? Like, we'll greenlight this sucker, but you got to find a couple of pieces of talent,
because it had been budgeted at around 2.2 million.
And we were like, okay, well, so we were Octavia had brought us on to help develop this book that she had bought into a TV series. And so we said, okay, well, let's see if we can show Octavia the trailer of Waffle Street. So we showed her the trailer, because she didn't know we'd made it, or she knew we made a movie, but she didn't know what it was.
Right.
So we showed her the trailer, and and we're in and out with Octavia, because at this point she's done the help, and she's super busy. So we'll see her for a couple of weeks, and then she'll vanish for a couple of months. And then we'll see her for a couple of weeks, and we'll vanish. And then we vanish for a couple of months to make a movie. And then, it was just, you're kind of off and on with your friends at that point.
You're seeing each other 6 times a year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then we see her and we're like, hey, we just cut the trailer to this thing. We just sold it. It's awesome. We're excited about it. Waffle Street. So she watches it and she's like, oh my God, you got Danny Glover. She gets super pumped. I love Danny Glover. And then love the trailer.
But we also knew Octavia's kryptonite, and that
she loves crime thrillers.
She loves it. I remember Making of a Murderer was on, and she was like, "He get it, y'all!" I could see it in his eyes. She gets her blood up. She loves it.
She gets really excited about mysteries and crime thrillers, and true crime. And so she's like, what are y'all doing now? And we're like, well, we've got this crime thriller we're doing. And she's like, oh, really? And we're like, yeah, we've actually we had a lookbook at that point. So we popped up the lookbook on the laptop, and we're just thumbing through it. And she's like, oh, yeah. Oh, wow. Okay. I got to read the script, y'all. You got to give me the script. So we give her the script. And within 48 hours, she calls and she's like, I'm in. I'm EPing this shit. Who y'all want for the lead? And she's like, is there a cop or something I can play? Can I play a cop or something? And at that point, it was not written into the script that the sister was black and that the brother that the main guy was white. It was just a family. Right. And so when we said, well, I think we can do better than a cop. And Esh and I were like, give us a second to think about it here. And so Esh and I were like, how do we fit her into this? Because we were like, oh, it would be a lot of fun. And it really stemmed off of the dynamic that happened between Danny and James in Waffle Street.
Yeah.
We just really liked this dynamic that happened there because it layers it up. It really does. And even though that one's kind of a true life story, we were able to notice that it was adding a dynamic and like a social commentary all on its own just because of the casting, what was happening in there. And so we said, Octavia, so we thought of this idea. What if we cast her as the sister and he gets brought into this black family, brings him in, and he fucks the family up. Like it's like a reverse Blindside kind of thing. And we thought that was funny, and we pitched it to her, and she thought it was hilarious. And she's like, I love that. Oh my God, we got to do that. So she's like, all right, I'll be the sister. Who do you want for the brother? And we said, okay, we brought lists over to her house, and we went through it, and we all landed on John Hawkes as our number one pick. And she's like, I've done movies with him, but I've never had a scene with him. She's I've been in like 3 movies with him, but I've never had a scene with him. She's all, let me reach out to him. I know his publicist really well and see if I can get a hold of him. So she wrote him this letter, and it said, John, we've done 3 movies together. We've never had a scene together. Let's remedy that. Read this script. I'm producing it. I love the guys that wrote it and are directing it, and we think you're going to be great for it. I just want to say one thing about it before you read it. We play brother and sister. And so when we talked to John later, he was like, I get this because he's a Luddite. He's not a technical guy. He's
send it by fax.
Yeah. He's like, fax it to me. So I faxed to him. And so I get this fax and I'm reading it. I'm like, he said he was just like brother, sister. He's like, I thought it was going to maybe be like The Jerk or something where it was like, we were playing, this like farcical family or something. He's like, but as I read it, he's like, I was so excited because it was like a crime thriller. And he's like, and he's all just the dynamic really, got him excited, and the script and the sort of crime thriller elements of it, his character. So he was like, I got really pumped up. He's like, I'm so glad it wasn't The Jerk.
Yeah. So like once we had John on board, then Octavia was like, well, who y'all want me to play my husband? And we're like, oh, well, we know, like, we've always seen Anthony Anderson in the role. And she was like, oh, Anthony, man, he's real busy with Blackish. But you know what?
She knew him from like the last decade of working. She's been a working actor for about a decade before that. And she's like, he's real busy, but we get our nails done at the same salon. Let me see if I can run into him. And she called us like 2 weeks later and was like, Anthony's in. It was just pretty amazing. It wasn't,
honestly wasn't the linchpin.
It wasn't the nail salon, but she ran into him at some party and cornered him and was like, hey, what are you doing? You got a week you can give me or whatever, And he was like, what's going on? She's like, we got this movie. Me and John Hawkes are doing it. These directors I love. Like, she's like, I wanted you to read the script. He's like, all right. I might be able to have a week, And so he read the script and, pretty quickly within a day or two told her, yeah, I'll do it. So,
and it just kept blossoming from there with like Robert Forster and
we've got to talk about Robert Forster because I'm such a huge fan. Yeah. I mean, just a huge fan of that guy. And he, for the few scenes that he has in Small Town Crime, man, he just throws it out of the park every time. He's just incredible. He's so good in the role. He knows exactly how to pitch it. So talk to me about Robert Forster. I came very close to interviewing him before he passed, and I was emailing with his wife, and I never got to talk to him. I was going to talk to him because I talked to Bill Lustig about Vigilante, and I talked to Fred Williamson, and I was like, I've got to get Robert Forster on the show, and it just never worked out. And then he passed, and the big regret of my life because I'm such a big fan. But yeah, go ahead, tell me all about him. He's amazing.
Well, I'm really sorry you didn't get that opportunity because he's just such a gentleman. Really is. I can't say enough great things about him.
He was a great guy, so great. But the opportunity arose in that, like, the people we would bring on would suggest other people, and I think it was Hawks that suggested Robert. And he was like, who I keep seeing when I read this? We're like, who? He's like, Robert Forster, and I just did a movie with him not too long ago. He's like, but I can't get him out of my head for this role. I just keep seeing him in it, and we're like, dude, we would love to get Robert Forster for that role.
Right?
So he's like, well, try him, and then I'll just sort of put in a good word, And so that's how we approached it. We went to his agent. We're like, hey, John and Robert are friends, and like John suggested him, and like we're huge fans of Robert's, and we'd love to work with him. Like, would he be interested in this? And then Robert read it within a week or so, and like got back to us very quickly, and was like, I'm in.
But he was like, who's gonna play that pimp?
Yeah, and it was so funny. He's like, who's gonna play that pimp? And we're like, well, at the time we were talking to Clifton Collins Jr. because our DP, Johnny, was friends with another director that had directed him in something like a decade previously, but they had remained friends. And she was like, he's fucking great. You guys are going to love him. He's so intense, and he brings so much to the table. We're like, all right, cool. And we were huge Clifton Collins Jr. fans from the beginning, literally from this movie called The Stoned Age, which cracked us up when we were in high school. He plays this loser with a really hot car that drives these rockers around.
Puffy vest.
And got this puffy vest full of feathers. But he gets rolled out of his car at one point, and all his feathers are flying everywhere. But he's so great in that movie. It's like a stoner comedy, and we laughed so hard at that movie when we were in high school. And then to see him do movies like Traffic, we were just like, is that the same fucking guy that was in that stoner comedy? Holy shit. It was just amazing to see him do so many different roles and so many different characters.
He's a chameleon.
Yeah. By the time we started making films, we were just like, we got to work with that guy. So he was absolutely at the top of our list for that pimp role. And when Johnny said he knew that director, we were just like, oh shit, get it to her, to get it to him as quickly as possible. Because we already had Octavia and John, and we had just gotten, we were thinking about getting Robert because John had suggested him. So we sent it out to him, and we were talking to him about doing it. And he was trying to see if he could fit it into his Westworld schedule because he was really busy. But when we said we're talking to Clifton Collins Jr. about it right now, and he wants to do it, we're trying to fit it into his schedule. Robert was like, "Oh yeah, you got to get Clifton." He's like, "I've done another movie with Cliff. This other movie," he said,
great actor.
He's a great actor. You're gonna want to get Clifton. We got to get him, guys. We're like, all right. We were like, it wasn't like a stipulation or anything, but he was pumped about him, and so were we. So we were like, all right. I mean, if Robert says we got to get him, we got to fucking really get him. So I remember when we were talking to Clifton about it, and we finally secured Robert in, and then we had another conversation with Clifton, and he was like, "Who's playing that old man anyway?" And we're all, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, who's playing that old man? Like the old man, the grandfather." We're like, "Well, we're excited. We just locked in Robert Forster," and he was actually talking about it. He's like, "Fucking Robert Forster? Are you kidding me? I'm in.
Of course.
We're gonna figure out how to do this." He's like, "We're gonna figure out how to do it. I love Robert Forster. I love that guy." We're like, "All right, great." So it was just an amazing, and of course, their scenes crackle because they're such good friends and they have such good chemistry, and they aren't afraid to be vulnerable and shitty with each other. It was so great, man. They were so good together.
Those scenes are hilarious at the end when they're driving around in that car, getting ready to go to the big ending, and oh man, oh god, I love Robert Forster. He's so good in the film, and Hawks as well. John Hawks feels like one of those actors that kind of every few years, like a great director or some indie director or whatever will kind of rediscover him, and he'll do 2 or 3 films in a row where kind of everyone's talking about John Hawks, and then it fades away again. Then he comes back again, and he's just always a great actor to watch. And what I loved about Small Town, especially, is it seemed like a film filled with the best character actors. And I feel like you cast in general, you tend to cast character actors. I mean, obviously Mel Gibson, Danny Glover, these guys are sort of more known as leading men, but Small Town, for us movie fans, for us deep movie fans who just really love great character acting and great chameleons and stuff, this was just a joy for me watching this last night. It was so great.
I love to hear that, man. Yeah, I mean, we try to have a lot of fun with the casting as fun as we can. And there's all these actors that, movies that we love, that we've seen them in and are dying to work with. And of course, our list is a laundry list. It's massive, but it's fun to check a lot of those names off and people that we're dying to work with again. We keep working with Dale Dickey. We keep talking to Clifton about working on something again. We were talking about Robert, about something, literally weeks before he passed away.
Such a shame. Yeah. We've spoken to Dale on the show. We've had Dale on the show. She's great. We love every time Dale shows up in a movie. She's just the best.
She's so talented, man.
She's as good as a human as she is.
And she is such a wonderful human being. She's a joy to be around. She's just so great.
And for us, that's 90% of it, right?
We
just can't get enough Dale Dickey.
We can't get enough of her, honestly. There's going to be a lot more Dale Dickey in our lives. We just love her to death, and she's so good. She actually came into our lives just
through Octavia
from Octavia. Octavia did a play with her that we had seen, and I remember we were looking for the mother role in Lost on Purpose, and we said, Octavia, would you reach out to Dale, who was in this play? And we'd seen the play twice, and they were all great in it. And I think Beth Grant was in it as well. And we said, hey, would you reach out to Dale and just see if she would be game to, give us like a week or whatever, or 3 or 4 days to shoot this role in Lost on Purpose. We can only play scale, blah, blah, blah. And she was just like, yeah, let me see if she'll do it. Like, let me ask her. And then, Dale let me read the script. She read the script. She's like, y'all, this is like right up my alley. Yes, this is going to be a lot of fun. So yeah, she likes good material. And if she can do it, she'll do it. Yeah. She's awesome.
So both Small Town and Fatman feature beautiful black muscle cars with deep roaring engines. You've got a Nova in Small Town and a Plymouth Fury in Fatman. Is this going to become a signature of future Nelms Brother films, or was it just for those two in particular?
Well, it's funny. If you watch Lost on Purpose, you'll start to see, the first time we were able
motif running.
Yeah, a little motif starting there. In just that, you'll see that. Yeah, there's
an affection and penchant for sheet metal. We like cars.
We like cool cars for sure. Those are fun. I mean, they don't have to be like burly ass,
savage
muscle cars. But those seem to fit those characters so well. We do in a way. I remember when we were running around with Small Town Crime that people were like, oh, it's really cool how those, it's got this Western motif underneath it all. We're like, oh, thanks, great. And they're like, and those cars feel like almost like the characters' horses in a way, like that it's like part of their personality. And we were like, yeah, like we love to do that. We love to like find what would that guy actually drive, or what would that guy actually want to drive.
Well, I think in a contemporary, and especially specific to America, or in California and such, but like the car is such an extension of you.
Libido or whatever.
Yeah, like it is. Like it's almost like an extension of you. So like Chris's red truck is an extension of him, right?
Yeah. You can see him in that truck. Yeah.
Skinny Man, so a Skinny Man's car, each one has a little bit of a different story. They both happen to be black muscle cars. But so in Small Town Crime, Ian and I had a friend in high school named Brian Gaines, and Brian's Mustang was a freaking beast.
Nova.
Yeah.
Nova, sorry. I spaced on it. Yeah, he had a Nova, and that thing was a freaking beast. And he would take us out.
He'd be like, let's go out for lunch. Go hit Taco Bell. Campus. So we're like, all right. And we'd get in that car, and he would hit the throttle, and you would literally be plastered to your seat. You'd be thrown back and plastered to your seat for about a mile as he shot to 70 or whatever. Like, it was just incredible. And that experience and that feeling has not worn off on us.
Burned into our brains. So when we were like, we wrote that into the script for Small Town, like he absolutely has a savage black Nova muscle car.
Now the fun thing, one of the fun details about that movie for us was that we were actually able to Brian had a little downtime from his job, and we were actually able to bring him out to Utah, and so he serviced that we had 2 Novas that we were jumping back and forth from. And of course, they're like quarter track cars. So they would like break down constantly because we're driving them around on the street all the time, putting a lot more miles on them than you normally would. And burning rubber.
Because it was important that the cars actually perform.
Yeah.
We're like, these cars have to do what we say. We can't cheat it. You know?
And they actually have to look badass.
What's also pretty amazing is John Hawkes did 99% of the driving in Small Town Crime. I mean, those like 180 gravel spewing burnouts and then taking off down the road. Like John did that.
And I remember him saying, I'm not a car guy, but when I get in this Nova, it just takes me over.
Of course. And what I like about it is, the older the car, the more cinematic it is. It just is more cinematic. New cars are shit. All new cars look the same. They're horrible on film. It always makes you feel like you're watching a TV show or something if you see modern cars, because it's the kind of thing they drive around on in modern TV shows. So older cars are always more cinematic, and they're always more pleasing. But also, I think that because your films have such a they have a commentary on America, especially like small town America, or in the case of Fatman, maybe more the military industrial complex or the bureaucracy or whatever, but also while maintaining kind of a small town America vibe. You have a commentary on America, but while having these kind of classic American vehicles in them, you're also saying, like, don't worry, we also love America as well. Like, there's a nice kind of Americana side to it as well, while you're also being satirical or commentating on something. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely on board. I mean, we have an immense love and reverence for America, and that's hopefully comes through.
And its idiosyncrasies.
Yeah. No, it totally comes through, and it's funny, as an expat, so I've lived here now 12, 13 years now, and
Oh, wow.
everyone is always kind of like, why, especially recently, people are like, oh, why do you live in America? And I'm like, because there's so much to absolutely adore about the country. So I do try and kind of keep a lot of that in the forefront of my mind, because and your films, especially the two that I've seen, seem to tap into a lot that I love about not only the movie making in America, but in general, kind of I lived down in the West, in Vegas for a while, and traveled around the West a lot. I'd seen Utah and California and Arizona and New Mexico and places. So a lot of the scenes in Small Town Crime, especially, kind of were very evocative of kind of where I'd lived out West for a bit. So I loved seeing all that again, and but also knowing those kind of suburban streets. Suburban streets out west are completely different to suburban streets out east, and kind of the difference between the two. So yeah, I loved all that, and there was a lot in it that, like I say, it's some of the reasons why I love America, especially the big roaring cinematic cars.
Yeah, I remember when we brought that to the sound design team, and they were like, is that real? Is that the sound of the car? We're like, yeah, it's a big block V8 in that thing. Like, they didn't have to change this thing.
They just amplified what we had.
Yeah, like, okay,
we want to use all of that. Give us everything you have. So
yeah, and then that car's a little bit different. Like that's a Monaco, and that's
there was a specific reason, and some people pick it up and some people don't. But there's a specific reason we chose that car. One, it was a cool car. Aesthetically, but the other thing that it was lining up with in the script, and of course we were looking at different decades of cars that might do this, and this was the one that we loved the most. But at the end there, when Skinny Man holds up that police car, that he says, this is the only damn thing you ever got me. You get the idea that, he should have been or could have been, because of Chris's gifts, when he gives people a gift, he should have been moving towards law enforcement,
right,
as an occupation, but he ended up, obviously, because of either his bad childhood or a combination of that and some bad choices he made along the way, he turned into a sociopathic psycho hitman. But that is the same make and model as that Monaco he drives, that Hot Wheel that he held up.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a nice physical representation of what he should have been, but he still drives that same car. It just doesn't have a siren on it.
Yeah, and also it's so iconic. I mean, that car was used in the original Terminator, the T-800. That's an iconic police car of a lot of movies.
Yeah.
No,
so
definitely.
it lined up well with our iconic police car that we wanted him to have, that the occupation he should be doing, and it was a badass car when you just painted it gloss black and had him driving around like a death race or something. We loved how it worked both ways.
So I was going to ask, because you had Danny Glover in Waffle Street. Do you know if he called Mel up and was like, yeah, work with these guys? Like, was there talk about, or is there talk about you guys doing something with the two of them again? I know that Lethal Weapon 5 is now being mooted again, but I wondered if you guys had kicked around any ideas using both Danny and Mel.
Well, it was funny, when we made Waffle Street, of course, we're big Mel, big Danny fans, love Lethal Weapon, and a bunch of other of each of their movies. But we were sitting down with Danny, and there was one lunch where we had a little bit of a long lunch for some reason. I can't remember if it was because we had to get something up or what was happening, but he literally regaled us and a few other crew members for about an hour and a half, taking us through how he started in regional theater, out of college in San Francisco, and then launched into this career, and kind of all the people that helped him along the way, and all the amazing stories of making all these amazing movies. And it was just incredible. It's like everything you ever wanted to know about the guy, all the way to him doing Predator. It was fucking incredible. The choice to do Predator. It was just incredible, because those were we love those movies.
To answer your question, yes, he and I are always kicking around ideas on how to repair them or reteam them.
But we were pumping Danny about Mel when we sat down with him, and, throughout that filming, and then when we were shooting this one with Mel, we were reminiscing and pumping him about stuff about Danny. And I mean, the two men, both of them love each other. and can't get enough of each other, and are dying to do a sequel to that franchise, man. Like, from both of them, they're just like, oh, we'd love to get another one in there. Like,
which is funny because he was up for retirement in number one. So,
right? I know. It's so funny. I mean, we were like laughing with them, and we were like, is there going to be a line finally in this movie where he's like, I think I really am too old for this shit?
Yeah, right?
Is that line finally going to come out?
I'd like to see, look, the perfect retaming would be in the Lethal Five.
Yeah.
If that can't happen, like, we're always looking for an opportunity to put those two back in the saddle together.
Yeah.
Yeah. It would be awesome, and I can't wait to see the cast of your next film. Is the next thing you're working on, as you hinted on earlier, sort of the trilogy of these kind of crime scripts that you've been writing over the last few years? Is that the next thing you're kind of working on, or are you changing tack?
It might not be the next thing we do, because we're talking to people about it right now, and we have two other things moving forward in front of it. But that doesn't mean it might not be. Crazy things happen all the time, whereas a movie, you're like, yeah, that's a back burner project. Like Fatman kind of was. We thought we were going to have to do another film or two to get to it because of the craziness and the size of it. But, you know, like a couple of good things, a couple of the right things happened at the right time, and that one flew to the front. Whereas, you know, now we're looking at that one as like, oh, maybe we'll do that, you know, after these other ones. But you really just can't tell what's going to go. So it's, got to keep some irons hot. I can't even tell you how many times I've listened to a commentary on one of my favorite filmmakers, and they're like, I'm doing this movie about whatever next. And I'm like, dude, that's going to be awesome. And then it's like 5 years later and they still haven't made it. And I'm like, what happened to that fucking whatever? You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, there's always those, and there's even movies that, you know, people started filming and then they were shut down and they never got made. And there's movies of scripts that got turned into other films. I think Rambo 5, for example, I think Stallone ended up turning it into a Jason Statham Homefront film, and like there's all sorts of different weird things that happen that kick around. But it's great, and look, whatever you do next, I'll be watching it. Really enjoyed the two movies. I'm going to go back and check out Waffle Street and Lost on Purpose as well. I see that they're available for me to either rent or watch. So I'm looking forward to doing that. And thanks ever so much for talking to me today. This has been great. It's been the easiest interview ever because you guys just have all these amazing stories, and I can just sit back and laugh. It's awesome.
It's our absolute pleasure, John. I think, look, Ian and I would love to dip our toes and our tone and our sensibilities into some more genre-specific stuff. Maybe we do a little sci-fi. Maybe we do a true Western. Maybe something like that.
And now we have the sort of vernacular down that we're talking about our tone and our voice. But it's funny, like I was saying earlier, like that just wasn't even on our mind. It's just how our sensibilities sway. You know what I mean? When we start to write something, we start leaning in a direction, like we start going in that direction. It just happens. It's just innate, you know? So now we go into places and they're like, what would you like to put your tone and your voice on? Like, oh yeah, well, you know, it's funny how that works. But yeah, we weren't in the beginning, you know,
you weren't consciously seeking it.
Exactly.
It sort of happened.
and you're just not conscious of or aware of the verbiage you need to use along the way until a certain point when everyone starts talking about this in a certain way, and you're like, oh yeah, that's this, you know.
Well, it would be great to get another wave of. I mean, I know horror still keeps ticking over, but it would be great to get another wave of genre filmmakers that aren't tied to the big franchises. I mean, not that I don't want you guys to obviously work at that level. That would be amazing. But, you know, nowadays I have franchise fatigue at this point, and it would be great to kind of see a wave of those, you know, $10 to $30 million budgeted sci-fi, horror, action, those kind of movies we got, not just for nostalgic purposes, but some of those 70s, 80s, and 90s movies that were sort of all over the place genre-wise were just... there's a reason why we all go back to them time and time again. So it'd be great to get another wave of those that aren't all just tied to either Star Wars or Marvel.
No, I couldn't agree more. I mean, you know, just growing up watching movies like Enemy Mine and like, you know, like Gremlins, like all these fucking amazing films that sort of cross genres and do their own thing. And like, yeah, man, like those are the movies, Last Starfighter, like those are the movies that like get your imagination like exploding and are rarely made. And yeah, man,
it's weird to see. Very rarely do you see a filmmaker come into the Marvel franchise and maintain their perspective.
Taika Waititi did an amazing job maintaining his voice in there, and I don't know how much of a pitch he had to do to get them that, or they were just like, hey, like, we want to reinvent this kind of Thor, franchise right now. Like, come in and, like, we're open to you coming in and doing your thing. And he did a fabulous job. And that's the kind of stuff I want to see more of, honestly.
Like, you want to see Paul Thomas Anderson do a Predator movie.
That would be amazing.
Right.
Like, what does that look like?
Like, a friend of ours said he probably thought it would be just Predator in a room thinking about what he's
But likewise, I think a lot of people, one of the reasons why nostalgia porn is happening all over the internet all the time is because we don't necessarily have or they're not front and center right now, the filmmakers in the league of, a John Carpenter or a Sam Raimi or a Tobe Hooper or a Joe Dante, those guys who kind of could take on any genre and take on any style and kind of make it their own and just do fun, inventive, weird movies. And I feel like you guys are right on track to do a few of those. And yeah, I'd love to see you guys do an out-and-out sci-fi movie or, like you say, a Western or whatever. That would just be fantastic. So I wish you all the best, and I hope that kind of path is out in front of you, because I, as a viewer, would welcome it.
Oh, thank you, John.
Thank you, John. And it's exactly what we're pursuing. So hopefully bringing some craziness to you soon.
Awesome. Well, when you do, let's chat again. I'm sorry, the Brooklyn streets are alive with a fire engine right now, so I'm sorry if you're getting some background noise. But thanks ever so much for being on the show and chatting with me this evening. And like I say, all the very best with everything you do next, guys.
Thanks, brother. Have a great one. You as well.
All right. Well, there we are. What a fantastic interview there with the Nelms Brothers. I really, really, really do hope you check out the films that we talked about. They get the big After Movie Diner thumbs up approval. And I do also hope that if you've enjoyed this conversation and others you may have heard on Booth Talk, then you subscribe, rate, review, tell your friends, share, retweet, whatever it is you can do on social to just let people know of what we're doing over in this corner of the internet, because I think it's awesome and I think more people need to know. And also, don't forget to check out aftermoviediner.com/interviews to find out all the people we've talked to and all the interviews we have coming up, because we have some great ones coming up. So again, a big thanks to the Nelms Brothers. I do hope you check out their movies. It's really worth it. And thanks again for listening. All the best.